In this bonus section of the course, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of logging. So let's start by talking about why we even do that. Why do we need logs? So in our application, we have different operations. Some are very important, some less important, some are destructive, some are not. And if something goes wrong, we need a way to understand what happened, where it happened, and when it happened. And logs can really help with that. So we could apply logs at different levels before, during, and after certain operations, and this is going to help us get context. There are different types of logs, and these types can be useful for different situations. The first type is the log type, and this is used for general purpose logging of important information. For example, the application started on port 3000. The next type would be warning, and this is useful for unhandled issues that are not fatal or destructive. So, for example, when we manage to save a task in the database, but only after 2 attempts. There's the error type, which is used for unhandled issues that are fatal or destructive for our system. So, for example, when we failed to save a task in the database, even though validation has passed. Then we have the debug type, useful for information that can help us debug the logic in case of an error/warning, and that is intended for developers. For example, logging the state of the application during some operation. And finally, we have the verbose type, information providing insights about the behavior of the application. This is intended for operators such as support. This is usually considered too much information. So for example, when creating a task, you could log a DTO and the username of the creator. So it's important to mention that this is just an example, the thing you're seeing here, and you should, of course, use what works best for your project. But in general, you could define multiple log levels for different environments. For example, as I show here in this table. So when you deploy your application to different environments, you might want or not want to show certain log levels. So find whatever works for you or for your team or for the company you work for and try to follow these standards. In our application, we're not going to do that just yet, but it's good to know that this is an option. You generally don't want to show all logs across all environments. Sometimes that would mean you show too much information, maybe sensitive information that you can afford to show to your test users or your development purposes, but not in production. So please pay attention to that. Now let's continue and do some hands-on work with logging. Now that you know some basics about logging, we can apply that to our application. And I want to say that there are many ways to do logging. The one I'm going to show you is the very basic method to do logging as defined in the NestJS documentation. For more advanced use cases, I highly advise you to look into some good logging libraries such as Pinot, Bunyan, or Winston, Pinot being my absolute favorite, by the way. Finally, I want to emphasize that when you approach developing a real-life application, you probably want to do logging as you develop your features and not after that. That is very important. Never develop your entire app and think about logging at the end. So logs should be a part of your day-to-day development lifecycle. The reason I haven't done that, of course, is because I wanted you to focus on steadily learning the NestJS framework without overloading you with information. So having said that, now we're ready to continue. And let's talk about the NestJS logger. The NestJS logger comes built in with the NestJS common module, so we don't have to install anything. And let's start with something simple, such as the main.ts file, the entry point of our application. And using a logger is quite easy. We're going to import logger from @nestjs/common. So we have a logger class here, and we need to instantiate that wherever we want to apply logging. In this case, it would be the bootstrap function. So I'm going to say const logger equals new logger. And there you go. You've just created yourself an instance of a logger that is an object with some methods that we're going to be using for logging. So what would be useful to log here? I'm sure there are several useful things here, but let's say we want to log after we are listening to port 3000. At this point, we know the application is running and we want to provide some information on that. So what we can do is then say logger dot, and look, by saying logger, I mean we refer to that object that we just created. And here we'll be presented with some methods that we can call. So by calling these methods, we're going to apply logs at that respective level. In this case, we want a log because, well, the type of message that we're applying is a sort of log type message. And here that would be a string, application, listening, on port, and then that would be 3000, which is hard coded here. We could make it a bit more fancy and do this for now. And then sort of print that as well within our text by using the string interpolation syntax. And there you go. That is how you apply a log at the log level. And we can see now that when we start our application, we can see that log showing here. So that is very nice and simple. Let's go for something a bit more difficult. I'm going to head over to the tasks controller. And I want to create a logger here as well to log some of those methods. Well, ideally all of those methods, but we don't really have time for that. So I want to create a logger here that is exclusive for this tasks controller. Of course, I could go and create a variable here at the top of my file, but that is not very good practice. Instead, what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, import that. So import logger from NestJS common. Now what I want to do is I want to instantiate my logger as a member of that class, as a property. So what I'm going to do is say private logger equals new logger. There's one more thing I can do here when applying my, when instantiating my logger, that is provided with a context. In that case, I want the context to be tasks controller. And what that means is that whenever we log anything with this logger, this is going to be presented as the context. So that's going to make it very easy for us to understand where our logs are coming from. So that is it for instantiating the logger. And now we can use it. So what would be a good candidate is, I think, let's start with get tasks. So here we know we returned the result already. So everything is fine here. We want to provide some information about a user trying to retrieve tasks. So since the logger is a member of the class, I can access it by using this.logger. And then I think what I want to log is something like the user. Then we know who the user is getting all tasks. And maybe we can even show the filters that the user is using. So this.logger.verbose, I think that would be a verbose log level. And we can say user, and we can say user.username, so we can say who the user is. And let's wrap that with quote marks, user, and then the username, retrieving all tasks. So let's start with that. Save it. And now head over to Postman. I'm already signed in and I've applied my auth token. So if you haven't done that, please stop for a second and do that. I'm going to get all tasks. And if I open up my terminal, I should see this. See verbose logs. They also appear in a different color, which is nice. User Ariel retrieving all tasks. What if I want to add some more information here? I want to say what the filters are. So if I go and do filters, and then also put the filter DTO in here, we're going to get some error. Oh no, that is actually my, my linting rules. So let's format that. Let's save it and see what else we got. And of course we got object because filter DTO is going to be an object. So what we can do whenever we want to print an object is just wrap it with JSON stringify. And some more linting rules. There we go. Sorry, having to format those because the linting rules got quite strict with the defaults of NestJS. Let's try that. And there you go. User Ariel retrieving all tasks, and the object is obviously empty. If we try to apply some filters, for example, status is open and search is clean, then what we'd get here is status open and search is Clean. All right. So let's pick one more method from this controller. And that would be create task. I think create task is a good candidate. I think this one is also quite simple. It's going to be verbose as well. We want to say something like the user and then the username is creating a new task with the data of that task. So it would be this.logger.verbose. By the way, feel free to pause the video if you want a mini challenge or a micro challenge. You can just pause, try to do that, log the useful information and the text that you need. Then we can continue. So I'm going to say user and then wrap that with some quote marks. User username, creating a new task, data, and then of course that would be an object. So I'm going to say JSON stringify, and then I'm going to print the entire create task DTO. Make sure you don't accidentally print sensitive information. That is bad. Don't do that. Let's try to create a new task. I'm going to need my auth token here. And what we got in the logs is user Ariel creating a new task with the data about the task. Great. Okay, that was okay. That wasn't too difficult. Let's find something that is even more useful and more difficult, which is handling errors. We head over to our tasks repository. And by the way, if I haven't said that already, since controllers, repositories, and services are all actually classes, you apply your logo exactly the same way. You would define a new class member and just instantiate a logger. So it doesn't really matter if you're wanting, if you want to log a repository or a service or a controller, you do it exactly the same way. So that is nice. It's consistent. I'm going to import logger here. And here, this is my tasks repository. So I'm going to say private logger is new logger. And the context would be tasks repository. By the way, the second parameter that you can, the second argument you can provide here is timestamp enabled. I will just set it to true and you'll see what happens. It's actually, if you look at the logs that are coming with NestJS, you can see those little sort of, I don't know if these are exactly timestamps, but it tells you how many milliseconds before the previous log, I believe, this happened. And I think for something like a repository where we do database operations, it's actually quite useful. And maybe it's even a good idea to apply it everywhere because it never hurts to know that your application is too slow. So anyway, when you set it to true, that means NestJS is also going to track the sort of milliseconds for those operations, or that's the previous log maybe. So let's do that. All right, so we have our logger instance. And if I look at the get tasks method of this repository, there's a lot going on. And at the very end, we call get many to get our tasks. And I'm asking myself, what if this fails? I mean, it's pretty destructive if database operations such as this fail. And we want to know about it when it happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this with a try catch block. So I'm going to put that here, and I'm going to return the tasks here. And basically, if my code here in this block is executed, that means an error has been thrown and it has been caught, which is great. And now I need to do something useful with it. So the first thing I'd do would be to, log it. And the second thing I need to do, which I'm just going to do now, is to throw an internal server error exception. And the reason you have to do that is because by wrapping this code in try catch, if there is an error, it's not automatically going to bubble up to the service and then to the controller, where NestJS automatically understands, hey, there's an error going on. I might want to return 500 to the user. That is default behavior by NestJS. Since we're applying this try catch block, we're sort of stopping that default behavior by catching it ourselves. So let's make sure we throw again an explicit internal server error exception. And then what we want to do here is log. So what I want to do is say this.logger.error, and maybe something like failed to get tasks for user, and we can say who the user is. Filters, and then JSON stringify my filters. That would be filter DTO. And let's format that because it's becoming too long. So we're erroring some useful text, who the user is, the filters, and it would also be useful for us. So, all right, where it's saying that something is wrong, you know what? Let me show you why this, although it might seem useful, it's not completely useful yet. So we have this error, and let's actually make it show. How do we make that fail? If we head over to our status query and we try to change this property to something that does not exist, that should, I think, throw an error. Let's head over to Postman and try that. So we do that. There you go. We get the internal 500, internal server error. And then if we look at our logs, we see failed to get tasks for user Ariel with the filter. So that is nice and useful, but I actually don't know what went wrong with my application. But I can fix that. So when you catch an error and you get that error object contains a property called stack, and that would be the stack trace. That would be the error coming from Postgres in this case, or from type ORM, I'm not exactly sure. And we can print that as well to help us even more. So what I want to do is I want to apply a comma here and say error. Oh, there you go. Apparently, so when you call an error method within the logger, you have an extra argument that you can provide, and that is going to be the stack trace. So the second parameter is optional, and it's going to be the stack trace. So you can just provide error.stack, and there you go. That should help us. Let's try to call that again. And we do get the useful text here in red, but we also know what exactly went wrong. We know that the query failed because the column status blah, blah, blah does not exist. So that is how you want to log your error messages. You want to provide some useful information for you, but also include the stack trace. Otherwise, you don't really have a way to act. Let's make sure we reverse that thing so we don't break our application for the future. And there you go. So very useful logs, and I think you got the idea. And I don't think there is a need for me to continue. If you would like, and I actually encourage you to apply some more logging and experiment with that in your application. So feel free to do that. And I hope you found this relatively short section useful.